Nothing But the Truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa from India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. Every week, we will deal with key issues of concern and bring you perspectives and clarity as to why these matter to you and what is the clear truth that emerges. Whether at our homes, our offices, on roads, public buildings, there are hundreds and thousands of closed-circuit television cameras or CCTVs for short. These have been installed for surveillance and monitoring of all kinds of activities. They are essential for maintaining surveillance of our critical and highly sensitive establishments, whether government offices, defense setups, power and telecom operations, to name just a few of them. On many occasions, they serve a useful purpose and we notice them when, for instance, they are used to detect suspicious activity and provide clues if there has been a hit-and-run case or an accident or murders, and they make detection much easier. Yet many of these CCTV cameras, especially in government setups across the country, now pose a serious security risk because they can be potentially used as snooping devices. What is worrying is that a majority of the CCTV cameras that are installed across the country are made by Chinese companies that are alleged to have links with the Chinese government. Given the recent hostilities between India and China, security experts fear that these are susceptible to misuse and can be tapped by the Chinese intelligence agencies to acquire sensitive information. And mind you, this is not scaremongering. To assess the potential threat these CCTV cameras pose, I spoke to Dr. Rajesh Pant, a former Lieutenant General of the Indian Army, who is India's National Cyber Security Coordinator for the National Security Council that comes under the Prime Minister's office. And he told me, and I'm quoting him, "You don't need to send spies across the border anymore. These CCTVs become the eyes of any country wanting to do mischief. They are the best tools for TechInt, which is a short form for technical intelligence." And he went on to add, "The unchecked proliferation of such devices across the country is a serious security risk." So in this episode of Nothing But the Truth, we will look at the grave security threat these CCTV cameras made by Chinese companies pose to India, and what are both the preventive and remedial measures that need to be taken. Let's begin by looking at the extent of the spread of these CCTVs across the country. My colleague Pradeep Sagar, who has done a cover story on the subject for India Today magazine, says that his government sources estimate that there were 2 million such CCTVs installed in the country. And his sources confirmed that more than 90% of them are made by Chinese companies that were partially owned by the Chinese government. Significantly, half of them, or 1 million such CCTVs, were installed in government setups across the country. Apart from military establishments, these CCTVs, or video security surveillance systems, VSS systems, are found in police headquarters, highways and airports, besides central and state government institutions. And of course, many private establishments have them, and you would have noticed them in homes as well. That the number that is installed in government institutions was confirmed by the Minister of State for Communications and IT, or Information Technology, when in a written statement, he informed the Lok Sabha in March 2021 that there are around 1 million Chinese-made CCTVs that are installed in government institutions. In the statement, he went on to add, there are vulnerabilities associated with video data captured through CCTV cameras being transferred to servers located abroad. He avoided mentioning China directly, but it was evident which country he was hinting at. What is as worrying is that experts point out that these CCTVs have very weak technical architecture and they can be easily compromised and used for offensive purposes by the enemy. So why are the surveillance cameras so vulnerable, and how can inimical forces to India use it to collect sensitive information? Let's go into that. Simply put, it is done by using the brains of the CCTV camera, and I'm simplifying all this. Every camera has a system on chip, or SoC, which is essentially a processor that operates under software instructions. The software is stored in the memory of the chip, known as firmware, and also holds the operating system as well as the apps or applications that run the operating software. So far, so good. But the threat lies if these devices are connected to the internet. They can then transmit data back to their servers in China. Every camera is equipped with an IP address that can be identified and are vulnerable to hacking or even being remotely shut down. Once connected to the internet, enormous quantities of data can be transmitted back to China and provide high-quality intelligence for their agencies. The Indian government went on full alert after the worst border clashes between the two countries in more than 50 years happened in May 2020 in the Ladakh region. And this, as we know, resulted in scores of deaths. In August 2021, almost 15 months after the first clash, cyber groups linked with the Chinese government were reported to have been engaged in a massive cyber espionage operation. The intent was to target 7 major electricity load dispatch centers near the LAC, or line of actual control, in Ladakh to disrupt power supply to the region at will. The Indian government was aware of these attacks, which included apparently a cyber strike to disable the country's national emergency response systems. Government agencies took preemptive action to thwart these groups successfully. The Indian government did not confirm these cyber attacks till the US-based cybersecurity firm called Recorded Future gave out details of the attack in April 2022. That's almost 6 months later. The firm said that Internet Protocol, or IP cameras, often used in CCTVs and their networks, and internet-operated digital video recording devices were compromised in the operation by the Chinese. The operation, the Future report said, was an effort to collect information about India's power infrastructure, and soon after the report came out, Union Power Minister R.K. Singh confirmed that 2 such attacks had happened in the Ladakh sector and India had thwarted it successfully. The Chinese government, however, hotly denied its involvement in this particular episode, but its credibility had already been running thin because major Western countries, particularly the US, had already taken steps to address the threat that these CCTV cameras pose. Fearing that China was using these devices to spy on it, the US government used its National Defense Authorization Act to prohibit government agencies, its own government agencies, from purchasing video surveillance products from a list of 26 Chinese firms making CCTVs and other surveillance devices. The US Defense Department charged these firms with either being owned or controlled by the Chinese military. And this was done way back in 2019-2020. Now, why did the US government do that? Because according to a legal provision of the China intelligence law passed in 2017 that was enforced by the People's Republic of China, these companies are duty bound to share all their data with Chinese state intelligence agencies. Despite vociferous denials from the Chinese government, the UK government followed suit by banning Chinese-made surveillance cameras in November 2022. The latest country to impose a ban is Australia, which did so on February 9th this year. Australian government announced that it would remove all Chinese CCTV cameras from defense sites because of fears of espionage. Though unrelated to surveillance cameras, the shooting down of a Chinese spy balloon by the US on February 4th shows just how concerned the West is about international surveillance programs run by the Chinese military using various civilian departments. Now, the US alleged that the balloon was monitoring multiple defense sites. China said it was used for scientific and meteorological purposes and denied that it had entered the US space deliberately, saying it was an accident. These claims are yet to be verified. In India, following the incursion by Chinese troops in Ladakh in May 2020, the Ministry of Finance issued a GFR, or General Finance Rule, 2 months later to prevent Chinese companies from snooping on it. The rule ensures that these Chinese firms do not directly or through their Indian or Chinese subsidiaries participate in procurements without prior registration with the Union Department for Industry. This would act as a check. However, security insiders claim that Chinese CCTV industry has found backdoor means to circumvent the barrier and continues to supply to India, especially for government installations, these CCTV cameras. The Chinese firms, apparently, often plan indirect participation through sales to local companies by way of semi-knockdown kits at very low rates. Domestic importers or distributors have also started importing Chinese goods indirectly from countries like Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Dubai, and others. In fact, such is the pricing of Chinese CCTVs on account of the economies of scale that they can achieve, that they win most of the bids because, as you know, the government goes for what is known as L1 or the lowest tender, which really means that the incentives of importing the technology and marketing, rebranding and selling the same as made in India is a far better option than locally manufacturing or having research and development done for these CCTVs. As a result, unfortunately, most leading Indian and global brands have discontinued their own product lines because of this. So let's come to what are the steps needed to remedy the current situation and prevent such CCTVs being installed in future and being misused. General Pant, India's National Cyber Security Coordinator, told me that last month he wrote to the Union Ministry for Home Affairs, and he did this to bring out a set of guidelines for the purchase of such equipment by any government department to prevent what he calls proliferation of unverified devices and also to work out remedial action for those already installed. Currently, there is apparently no nodal ministry that deals with the surveillance device and the issues that they cause. General Pant also told me that he has funded the government-owned Center for Development Telematics, or CDOT, to work out a national trust center for software and hardware testing to verify devices being purchased by sensitive government departments. He also cites another example, which has happened in Singapore, which has come out with what is called an IoT or Internet of Things star ratings. Now, these ratings indicate whether or not a device has been cleared for snooping bugs. What may also help is if the Bureau of Indian Standards comes out with specific provisions to address national security concerns. Existing standards of the BIS for CCTV systems are the same that apply to mobile phones, cash registers, laptops, set-top boxes, power banks, and the like. They need to have specific provisions for CCTVs. Now, another problem has arisen. The market dominance of Chinese-made CCTVs is really a lost opportunity for India to become a net exporter of surveillance hardware through manufacturing them rather than just assembling Chinese goods or Chinese electronic goods and selling them. According to one estimate, a major company had estimated that the global CCTV market is expected to grow to approximately $46.5 billion, or the rupee equivalent is rupees 3.8 lakh crore. And this is to happen between 2020 and 2030. Industry insiders claim that due to Chinese imports, India has almost no share of this very large pie. However, things could change if cheap Chinese imports flooding our market, particularly the CCTVs, are brought to a halt and Indian companies are encouraged to make these in India itself. But there are other problems as well. If the center puts an immediate ban on everything related to Chinese telecom networks, particularly the CCTV, it would affect its own surveillance mechanisms. Replacing entire surveillance systems will also mean incurring an additional financial burden. Experts, therefore, recommend taking action in a phased manner, beginning with highly sensitive security establishments and then gradually phasing it out in other government institutions. As a top cybersecurity expert told me, banning of Chinese-made CCTVs is a political step. We need to make sure there is no backdoor entry of Chinese intelligence into surveillance devices. And he added, that the absence of any clear-cut data protection law further complicates the situation. General Pant says that the simple solution is to ensure that CCTVs in sensitive establishments are not linked to the internet but operate only in a closed wired loop within each establishment. That establishes what he calls an air gap. Also, that these cameras are bought and installed only by trusted sources. Another expert told me that you could have the chips in these cameras already installed reprogrammed by Indian software companies to curtail the menace of snooping. What is clear is that the existing laws and awareness remain woefully inadequate to deal with the threat that the CCTVs pose. This must be remedied urgently. For more details of what action needs to be taken, as well as threats these Chinese-made CCTVs pose, do read the cover story done on the issue by my colleague Pradeep Sagar in India Today magazine. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing but the truth.